Previously in part one.
You have achieved more in one lifetime than anyone that I've ever known.
In chess, it's like everything's out there, it's like mano a mano, it's like your mind versus the other mind.
Is this when you first started realizing the, the extent of your competitive nature?
Yeah, I would say yes. Boom.
Must have been very satisfying. Did you ever play Boris Spassky?
Yes, I did play Boris Spassky.
You decided to leave the outside world and go within to a spiritual community. What
possessed
you feel? Yeah.
So I would get my revenge, I would just take the horse by the reins.
So then how in the world did you go from the ashram to a love of horse racing? How
What? They're not natural, they don't naturally fall. When I was in Canada, I had experience sort of higher up in the echelons of the organization of not only doing bookkeeping, but being financial management and responsible for managing and organizing some businesses. So I had a certain business sense. I had a few different businesses, some real estate. And so I was interested in making money because here I was, my early 30s, and it's like, here I is, I'm free. Like the rest of my life is ahead of me. What shall I do? Well, what you do is the things that you're good at. I was good at computer programming or starting to become good at computer programming. This is the early 80s, okay? And one of the things, I got a pamphlet because I subscribed to different things. I got on somebody's mailing list. I got a pamphlet that says you could make easy money in the horse races. Who knew? Easy money. I'll try it. I'll try it out. What could go wrong? So, and a person that I knew in Chicago claimed to be a professional horse player at the local racetrack, Arlington racetrack. Some people will know this. And he took me to the races, and he took me to a very famous horse race, the very inaugural running of the Arlington Million horse race, which became like a very famous race thereafter until Arlington closed down a few years ago. And I saw the famous John Henry, who was a famous racehorse, run in the very first, so I was like, wow, this is amazing. All these people yelling and shouting, and my friend made some money. I mean, the horse was not the favorite, but he was like, second or third. I thought, wow, that's sounds like fun. And I became interested in that. I applied my usual rigor, my studiousness, my finding all of the best teachers, the best publications that had like real, publishing house imprimaturs on them, so they weren't like fly by night things. And I started to learn, and I started to use my programming skills even back in the early and mid 80s to write little things that I, read about the formulas for doing stuff. And
Right. So is that how it blossomed out into creating this software where, you have people from all over the world that make money by using your betting software?
well, that's fast forwarding 20 years.
Yeah.
But at the beginning, like fresh out of um, uh, spending 10 years of my life with a spiritual guru, well, of course, I had to find another guru, you know, and I found Dr. Sarton, Dr. Howard Sarton, the doc. And I ended up going to a lot of seminars around Canada or Ontario and the United States. Anybody could approach his organization, and so I did, and I kind of became a follower of his, which is interesting when I think about it that way. Um, Became an adherent of his particular way of analyzing horse racing, and a lot of it was using computer software and even like handheld computers, like handheld programmable calculators in the early days, which as computers became better and better, migrated to being, little programs you'd run with like little floppy disks and stuff like that. And people would take their little laptops, which were kind of larger at the time, to the racetrack, which I did. And I wrote several little programs for my own use and showed them to a couple of to the doc and to a couple of other people, and they seemed like it was quite interesting. But I was not part of that inner circle either. I was in Canada. It's like
Mm.
Canada is a blessing, in that it's on the periphery of like the big, burly, confusing, United States where everything is happening. And so you're insulated, but you're a looker on, and so I was never on the inside of so many different things, including my horse racing guru, you could say.
Far in the distance, there's a promise. It seems far in the distance. I put it on the altar, though it was mine. I put it on the altar.
But after he retired due to health in the early 2000s, and he kind of dropped out of it, and a lot of people kind of wondered, well, whatever became of him. Through a series of circumstances, I ended up being in contact with him again. I didn't really have much personal connection with him, and I had been creating some software, which with some code which I got from his ex-programmer who he had a falling out with. And I said, well, bam, here's beautiful Windows modern software, none of that old, computer stuff that we had. And isn't this beautiful? And is it the same as what you had? And he had me send him a bunch of printouts, and a bunch of people I was working with were using my software on a prototype basis. Sent him a bunch of printouts comparing his software to my software. It was the same. It produced the same results for better or for worse. And he said, my son, you have, he said effectively, yes, you have my blessing. He wrote me a letter which I could publish, which was worth gold to me, because who wants another piece of horse racing software by some guy in Canada? Well, nobody. But, something in the legacy of the famous or infamous, Howard Sarton, which he had a lot of respect in the horse racing community, like serious handicappers. So I started a business based on that in the mid 2000s. And pretty much that was kind of at the end of when I was tailing off my other computer consulting work, which is how I gradually ended up supporting myself.
What then got into you to make you want to, say, go to the Monroe Institute and learn out-of-body experiences, or learn remote viewing or spoon bending? How did that segue happen?
Well, I didn't give up on my spiritual life. I mean, because spiritual life is at the core of my understanding. And that continued to grow too by, I meditated and do as often as I could. I became fascinated by the story of Robert Monroe and his early out-of-body experiences, spontaneous out-of-body experiences in the 60s and 70s, or from the 50s, really, but he wrote a few books in the 70s and 80s. And he developed a really fascinating audio technology, or he evolved an audio technology, binaural beats, which he mixed in with a lot of other subtle audio technology to help induce altered states. So, I became, once I understood that that was a sort of maybe as an alternative to simply just sitting down and learning techniques of meditation and practicing them, which is difficult for some people to do, because after many years was not difficult for me to do. But I was interested with this sort of more modern, more Western, certainly less dogmatic approach to experiential spirituality, not a story told by a history or a wise teacher. But I liked Monroe's take on it, which was basically, here's what happened to me. Here's some tools for you. Go out and find out what happens for you, and come back and tell us all about it. Tell yourself all about it, and then tell us all about it, rather than, oh, thou shalt do this. Here's a step one. Here's a step two. So that was kind of interesting. And finally, I screwed up my courage to go to a program in the 2014, I think, in Virginia, and their so-called Gateway program, which was quite remarkable. And it was really all that was advertised. The out of body part was not my experience, and they even try and minimize your your expectations for that, because everybody's on their own path. Everybody's got their own, mental conceptions, and certainly reading Monroe's books of flying off to fanciful places, and other people who have written about the same things. Well, you can overlay your expectation, and that expectation interferes with what your own legitimate experience is. So I did not experience those flying off to Never Never Lands, but I had some experiences. It's hard to communicate. I'm not sure it's relevant to this discussion, but there was things that I knew specifically from fetching them from an interior altered consciousness state. But that more mature take on spirituality really appealed to me. So I took a number of courses. I can tell you how I got involved in remote viewing. Probably on the first day or second day, and you talk to people as you do, and I said, well, I'm involved in horse racing. And another guy who was there said that he got this message in his meditation session, that he's got to talk to me about horse racing and remote viewing. And so he asked me, he says, well, have you ever tried remote viewing related to horse racing? Sort of like it's a way of prognostication from precognition. It's a form of precognition, or perception at a distance, which is probably a better term than remote viewing. It's perception by various senses of activities at a distance in time or space. And I said, no, I don't know anything about that. Remote viewing, what's this? So he said, sat me down, and this happened to be a buddy of Joe McMoneagle, who is one of the, famous remote viewers, from the CIA's and the Army's Stargate thing. But so he explained me what remote viewing was, and there was a protocol to it. And you go into an altered state, and you get perceptions. You try to not interpret those perceptions, but you try and write down those perceptions. And there's a protocol to compare to, alternatives, and those alternatives can be mapped to binary outcomes. And that's a shorthand description of associative remote viewing. And you can use that to make predictions, to choose A or B, to choose up or down, stock market up, stock market down. Favorite in a horse race wins, favorite in a horse race loses. Team A wins, team A loses. So you can use it for making binary predictions. I mean, remote viewing as a larger activity was used by the CIA for spying and for getting all kinds of information, which I also learned how to do after a while. So anyway, I learned remote viewing because I was interested in horse racing. So that's the through line to that. He said, you could learn how, this guy told me you could learn how to do this, and it could be like a really great addition to your horse racing, I thought, well, hey, I'm up for anything. So I took a number of courses over the ensuing couple of years. I became pretty good at it. I had a hit rate in terms of being able to identify the target that we were seeking to describe, probably approaching 70%, 75% in some cases, which is significant if you can make predictions like that. The thing is that it didn't really, in my opinion, it didn't really work in the end for horse racing any better than my software worked.
Right. But you went down that path to find that out.
I'm curious, and I think that's been the through line
Yes.
since childhood. Is I'm like some people would say, well, I'm afraid to do that, or I couldn't do that. No, I'm not going to bother doing that because I couldn't be good. They'll laugh at me. And I said, yeah, what's the worst that could happen? Or I'll join a cult. What's the worst that could happen? Or, I'll move to rural Ontario. I'll learn how to live, in the bush in the winter. What's the worst that could happen? So probably the unafraidness, it's even like in cases when it was against my best interests, when being afraid or being cautious would have been a good idea. There's this thing, oh, okay, I'll try that, because I feel like there's some, I don't know, some protection, some, it's nothing that bad is going to happen to me. Maybe that was, maybe that was a little ignorant, but I don't feel like, yeah, I don't even feel like that now. I'm going to stick with that, like I've got some guidance. I've got some angels. That's the only way I can put it.
Tell them I'm a winner, yeah. Not pop down, not Joe, not turn in a sinner. Oh, man, still a believer. Even if me get knocked down, me keep the bounce. Now see me front, you got me from a little and I grow. Come on, a winner, yeah. Still a believer. And after the sunset, me not fed, cause I'm the deafy defend.
What a wonderful way to live. Fearless, yet knowing that you have protection. It really helps you go into all sorts of different areas that a lot of people, as you said, would be afraid to, and then they add up to the fascinating being that you are. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up is that you are now a meditation facilitator for a wonderful program called the Triad Mind, which was developed by Mark Surto, who was the original engineer for Bob Monroe and created the binaural beats for Bob Monroe's Monroe Institute and for people to explore states outside of their typical normal physical abilities. And speaking of altered states, what in the world would ever possess you to go swimming in 40-degree Fahrenheit water?
Well, everything is connected to everything. And so, part of the meditative techniques, part of the yoga, since thousands of years, has been breath-related, breath work. Yoga, controlled breathing, and breathing like chanting or drumming or things like that, but breathing because it's free and it's like what you do all the time. Helps you reach an altered state as it is. It's a form of meditation, an adjunct to meditation. And one of the proponents of breath work in modern times has been a Dutch gentleman by the name of Wim Hof, who is very well known, And so, of course, that would be interesting to me because of the breath work, which I learned part of in program related to the Monroe Institute, related to remote viewing. So, but then when I made that leap from breath work to Wim Hof and his whole emphasis on exposure to the cold, because of exposure to positive stress, like stressing the body positively produces a reaction by the body, which strengthens various aspects of the body, the immune system, the different organs, the production of certain types of brown fat, which to help gradually change your metabolism. It's very good in many different health ways. So as an adjunct to the breath work and the meditation, I just decided to take myself into the water. I took a few online courses, but you have to satisfy yourself for the cold part of it. So I did that a little bit first in Ontario, and then we moved here to the West Coast, like on the sea, pretty much on purpose, like to be on the sea because the sea is a wonderful place. Then guess what? The sea is cold, So that's why I did it. But lo and behold, you can make a community of doing pretty much anything, and it's a growing thing. There's people going into the cold here, going into the cold there, all of the scientific studies. So I took a course offered by the by the city of Nanaimo, where I live. And so we met, and we would go into the sea. And some people were like, "Oh, I've never done this. I don't know if I can do this." But I had been doing that already, so I was pretty comfy. But now I do that about 3 times a week.
Well, you certainly, I've seen a couple of your videos and you look like you are having a ball. And I'm sitting there shivering just watching.
I have to say that if you want to know a way to, people say, "Well, I can't meditate because my mind is like so active, and I can't focus on being right here, right now." I got a solution for that, and the solution is to go into 40-degree water and to just do it. To go in up to your head, to dunk your head, and if it's cold enough, and you first of all, you won't die. Maybe you think you will, but you won't. I mean, if you're reasonably healthy, but you will find, even if you stand under a cold shower, you will find that you're not thinking about what you're going to do with your day, or you're not thinking about how that person cut you off in traffic. You're not thinking about, "Oh, I'm in the cold water, look at me. You're not thinking about any of that. You are just there. It is cold. You are breathing. If you remember to breathe, you should remember to breathe when you're in the cold water. But then when you breathe, it's a great way of bringing yourself into presence. And this is part of many traditions of finding ways to bring yourself into presence. So it's good practice.
I can't imagine finding a better way to actually be present than to feel something so foreign on your body that you have to stay present, or else you would never be able to stay in the water. So, and I know
It's
that
true.
being in that present moment brings in so much beautiful energy. And I think you are a role model when it comes to that. And I love your excitement and enthusiasm about it. It's only enabled me to just head dunk into the water. I did go into a tank once and it was okay, but I didn't want to do it again.
It's a lot more fun than some people say, "Well, why don't you just like do a cold shower?" Well, I did that. It's not as much fun
No,
as like being in the sea, especially with other people who can become friends with, or you could say, "Oh, look, you can do this."
right.
And it's not so much being this is the last I'll say about that. It's not so much being in the water. You could definitely practice being present, but you can't be in the water all the time. Yet you wish to be present. And so you practice being present like you practice any other meditation, not because you wish to go away and be in an altered state, but because you wish to come back into this world, as chaotic and confusing as it is, with the mind that you have, the body, the skills, the history, the persona that you have, but you wish to be where you are right now and not miss it by being on your phone, by thinking about what you're thinking, by grumbling, even just to yourself. You see people walking down the street muttering to themselves, and they're missing the fact that it's April, that the daffodils are coming out, or that the blossoms are coming out on the tree, or that some guy is like banging a drum, or there's a seal swimming in the ocean. I mean, people like to see, but in other words, I'm citing things that relate to just being there and not being a commentator. I would say if there's anything that is a summary of where I am now compared to where I was when I'm 8, that is probably the through line is different ways of both building out my persona, this person, this thing known as Ted, while at the same time, at first I wanted to get away from Ted, and then I wanted to be, sort of away from the world. But now I really enjoy the world that I'm in. I enjoy the people that I know, some people more than others, but it's because I know a way, which I don't always, or even as often as I'd like, partake of, but I know a way to be present. And when you're present, there's no bad headline news. The world is not ending. The sky is not falling. The politics are not creeping up on you. The prices are not going up or they're not going down. You're just there. You're breathing. Well, you have enough, wherewithal to make a life. If you're lucky, feel love. If you feel love, you feel connected. If you have a community, but being present and not being in the commentative mind is a tool that I feel blessed to have had exposure with. It takes time, and it will always. That's the work of a lifetime, really, is to be where you are.
Those are such beautiful words that you've already closed our interview today with those words of wisdom. And I am so appreciative that you shared your time with us today. And I'm finding you to be extremely inspirational, and especially on how to get myself into the moment, the present moment. I mean, what better words than what you have just said? Thank you so much, Ted, for being here today.
Thank you, Laine. You bring it out of all of your guests, but as you know, you bring it out of me, and I'm grateful to be knowing you and to be doing this.
Thank you so much, Ted, and we'll talk to you soon.